guys, so I've just got off Reddit. Never a good sentence to use. And there was a thread on there about whether or not white people get preferential treatment in Rwanda. And I read that and I thought, oh, that's a controversial subject. Better leave that alone. But several days later, I was still thinking about it. So I thought, let's talk about it. So I thought what I'm going to do is, first off, I'm going to just give you a quick overview of some of the main comments on the thread and the arguments being made. Then I'm going to tell you whether or not I think that I agree that there's white privilege or not. And I'm going to wrap up, spoiler alert here, by, if I do think it's going on, what I think can be done about it. Okay, so the first post was from Lazy Yellow 264, and the title is, Are White People in Rwanda Given More Preferential Treatment? This might not just be an issue concentrated in Rwanda. This could be a continental issue. Even Asian countries deal with this too. However, what I have noticed in Rwanda whilst visiting is that white people do sometimes get treated better, even given extra help than other black people or Rwandese people. I know that Rwanda is trying to encourage more tourists to visit Rwanda, so the impression tourists get of the country and its people is important, but that shouldn't mean putting white people on a pedestal either, in my opinion. I guess it's just disappointing to see. I'm Rwandese, by the way, but grew up in the West, so I was always around white people. So I'm used to being treated differently because of my race, but I don't expect any less from people there. However, while I'm in Rwanda, I thought the last thing I had to think about was being treated differently because of my race as well. Also, because there are fewer white people there, it somehow makes it more noticeable when they are given preferential treatment compared to everyone else. Again, this is more of an issue in the whole of Africa, but I truly hope someday even Rwanda learns to stop treating tourists, foreigners and white people better than their own people. Okay, so a couple of the responses. I didn't even read the whole thing, just the title, but the short answer is yes. Long answer, yes again. Yes, they are, at least according to my small sample size, me and my friends. There is a hierarchy of treatment in Rwanda's institutions, banks, hotels, restaurants, local government offices, where white people come first, then black people who speak English second, then those who speak French, and lastly, those who speak Kinyarwanda. I have even tried it in different places where I got better service while speaking English or French compared to the time I chose to speak Kinyarwanda. Horrible state of things, but it does exist. That language point is really interesting. There's some people saying, yeah, it's across the whole of Africa, and others saying, yeah, East Africa, it's very noticeable. Yes, there is, unfortunately, and many white people take advantage of it. I'm white, lived in Rwanda about 2 years. I tried my best to live local and only have local friends and actively spoke Kinyarwanda. I did use my white privilege as a force for good on one occasion. We lived in a neighbourhood, Gikondo, which was entirely constructed of Rwandan people and always ran out of water, sometimes for up to a month. The water supply was turned off without explanation. On one such occasion, my elderly landlord had tried calling the Umurenga district plenty of times to ask where the water was. It was so inconvenient and costly not having running water. She then came to my little house. She and her family lived in the big house on the same property, and asked me if I was willing to call the Umurenga to see if that would help. She gave me the number and I spoke to them in English when I rang them. They instantly apologised, sent around a technician, and we had water that day. It had been a month without water. My landlord was so grateful and I had very mixed feelings about it all. I once got special treatment when I spoke English, but the moment they asked me where I was from and I said Tanzania, things went downhill fast. Okay. I would argue that this has nothing to do with colour though. It's a malign way of treating people favourably because you think they're rich or could be useful to you. You'd get the same treatment if you were in a position of power or wealth. There is a great deal of belief that white people are rich. The same applies to people who live abroad and so on. I am a Rwandan who resides in the United Kingdom and people treat me differently depending on their knowledge of this. This is an interesting one. I'm going to come back to this a little bit later. The perception of wealth point, I think, is actually quite an interesting one. I will come back to this. I suppose your growing up in the West explains this, otherwise it wouldn't come as such a surprise to you. With that said, though, if the experience you've been having in terms of the treatment you've been receiving has been particularly hard in any way, I'm really sorry about that. But that preferential treatment which you've acutely and accurately observed isn't going anywhere anytime soon. Not in Rwanda and not anywhere in Africa or any other third world regions of the world. Colonialism of the mind is very deep-rooted and generational, and only those who either have the same life standard as Westerners or have lived with them for many years see them as their equals. To everyone else, they are beings who must be addressed reverentially because the immediate assumption is that they're willing to pay sums that are much more significant than those locals are willing to pay. And some more subtle ones can be the idea that by being nice to a Westerner, some sort of friendship might ensue, which in time might result in their finding a way to move to a Western country. I think the only place where white people get served last is in the Western Caribbean. They call it reverse racism. I'll come back to this a bit later as well. Yes, it can indeed be uncomfortable for both Rwandans and expats at times. While some expats may take advantage of certain situations and act rudely, not all do. It's also worth noting that tourist prices often varies depending on whether you're international, African or Rwandan. This may align with your observation or even be one of the contributing factors. When it becomes apparent that internationals are charged more, it reinforces the perception that all of them are wealthy, which can perpetuate this mindset. Regarding the comments about other countries like Ghana, it agrees with my observations there. In my experience, they tend to be indifferent to whether someone is white or not. I've experienced this a lot in Kenya. It's uncomfortable at times, the preferential treatment I've received. Yeah. Okay, so you can see that there is nobody in that thread standing up going, this is ridiculous. White people don't get any extra privilege in Rwanda. And that's because we know it. We all know that this happens. I don't think that you can live here for any length of time and not see that this is happening. I'm going to give 3 examples now. I was sitting there thinking about it, thinking, so when have I really experienced it? When can I be sure it was because I am white that this has happened? And I kind of came up with 3 main ones. And I had to think for a minute because, we do use the term mzungu privilege here a lot. So mzungu is the word for a foreigner. People say it means a white person, but it usually means anybody from outside the country, a traveller, somebody who is not from round these parts. And so I had to think for a minute, am I getting this preferential treatment because I'm white, or am I getting it because I'm foreign? And I'm going to start off by using the term white privilege here, and I'll explain why as we go on. Mostly because I stand out in a crowd. You can see me coming. It is very clear just by looking at me that I'm not from here, rather than waiting until I open my mouth to confirm it. So I think the examples I'm about to give probably, they definitely happen because people saw me first before they heard me. So in that term, it's white. Privilege. So the 3 ones I'm going to give, the first one, this was a long time ago, many years ago, but there was a bank that I used to bank with, and when you went into the main room downstairs, you could go to the upstairs, the first floor, where there was a VIP, I'm going to say VIP lounge. I've never heard of a VIP lounge in a bank before. But I guess maybe in the UK and America, you get to go to the VIP area of a bank if you're a millionaire or something, like there's preferential treatment there. But generally speaking, a bank is a bank. But it was tacitly understood within the expat community that you could go upstairs and use the VIP services even if you weren't paying to be a VIP member of the bank. So even if you didn't have a large, fat business bank account, you could still go up there and cut past the queues to use it. And I definitely did use that once or twice. The other one that I did, and I still cringe to this day because it was so overtly obvious that I'd done it. So when you have a residency visa, so you live in Rwanda, if you want to pop across to the border in DRC or you want to pop down to Burundi, you can get this little piece of paper for about 10,000 francs, and it's called a sepgel. And it means you don't have to pay for a visa for Burundi or DRC. You can just pop across using this little piece of paper. So I made my application online, and then I just turned up to collect my piece of paper. And when I got to the room, I looked, and there must have been about 50 people at least there. Like every single chair was taken. There was standing room only. And I looked at this and I thought, oh, I'm going to be here for a couple of hours if I take a seat. And I wince internally when I tell you this story because it goes against every fibre of my being, but clearly not enough for me not to have done it. It was sort of understood in the expat community that when you go into that room, on the right at the time, there was like one of these banners, like a scroll down banner that just had like "Welcome to Immigration" on it or something. And it was understood that if you just duck behind that, there was a guy sitting at the desk and he'd just deal with whatever you needed pretty quickly. And I did. And I turned up and I looked at the group of people sitting there, and I knew that was going to take a couple of hours. And I knew that if I did this, I would be out of there really quick. And I did. I just stepped behind the banner, signed the paper, took away my sepgel, and off I went. I still wince internally that I did that. And of course that doesn't make it better because I still did it. But that was definitely one of the most overt points at which I think I could say I had, white foreign privilege. And the third one was I went to Ministry of Justice to get a police clearance certificate. And again, it was a case of I walked into this room and there were loads of people sitting down, standing up, and I just hovered and a guy at the desk saw me and he just did that. And this is a sign that you see quite often, is if you're in a crowded room or, if you're sitting in a queue, occasionally you will get that, which means come over here and I'll deal with you. And so I went there, and it goes against every fibre of my British being, because in the UK we respect the queue. You never cut in front of somebody in a queue. If you're in a queue, we take sandwiches with us to the post office. You know what I mean? If there's a queue, we will join that queue and we will stand in line. So yeah, I have no excuse for having done that. And I know that if I had sat down in immigration office for the sepgel, somebody at the desk would have done that and, dragged me forward. There have been times at the bank, if I'm standing in a linear queue, I absolutely wouldn't do it. I would die of shame before I did it. There have been times at post office and bank where people have sort of called me forward and I've done the awkward shuffle of, half pretending not to have seen them and staying in the queue. Although I have had times when I've been in a queue and Rwandan people, post office especially, just go straight in front of me. It's like, whoa, hold on, what? But I find it easier to do that. I find it easier to skip a line if there isn't a physical line. If people are milling in a building, or if the queuing is on seats. Years ago, Bank of Kigali used to be that any branch you went into, you'd have the seats, and the queuing system is to sit down on the empty seat at the end, and then when somebody goes up, everybody moves along one seat like that, and then you move forward, and then you go along the other way, and then you move forward and you go along the other way. I never ever would have skipped a line like that. It's no. I would prefer to stand in the line. Like that lady said, it is uncomfortable. There's this sense that, you know, all foreigners who get the privilege must love it. It's like there are definitely arseholes who walk past going, hey, you know, other people, screw them, you know. Most of us are not like that. Most of us feel extreme shame at this, but clearly not enough shame not to have done it. You know, when I looked at a 2-hour wait in a hot and stuffy room and then somebody offered me a way out of that, I took it. Yeah, not proud, no excuses. I did that. Now, you know, I've heard interesting stories from other friends. I heard interesting stories from Rwandan friends who have had encounters, sometimes with the police, sometimes in other situations. And I've thought to myself, I bet that wouldn't have happened to me. I might be wrong. It might have happened to me. I don't know. I can't prove it. But there's a strong sense in me that they were treated a little rougher than I think foreigners might have been. And I have a friend from the Caribbean who told me a story. He was stopped by police. He's black, so I think the police assumed he was Rwandan, and the conversation started pretty aggressively. And then he opened his mouth and the guy realised, oh, this guy is not from here. He's clearly a mzungu. And the conversation got very, very polite very quickly. So yeah, and that's why I talk about the difference between white preferential treatment and mzungus, because not all mzungus are white, and it's easier to identify a white person just because we glow in the dark. You know what I mean? You can see us from a mile away. Whereas with a lot of black foreigners, it's not until somebody starts speaking that somebody goes, oh, something's different here. I would be really interested to hear from Chinese people and Indian people watching this, because we have huge Chinese and Indian communities in Rwanda. You know, and I would be really interested to hear what level of preferential treatment, if any, they feel that they get, because as well, they often run a lot of the big businesses around here. So it would be interesting to know if everybody's getting the same preferential treatment for being foreign, or if there's something about that perception of wealth going on there. Because I was thinking about this more and more, and then I suddenly thought about a situation where I don't think I would get preferential treatment. So if I turned up, you know, in like ripped jeans and a shabby top, looking like I'd just fallen out of bed, and you put me in a line next to a really smartly dressed Rwandan, because Rwandans know how to dress, you know, I think I would not be called forward first. I think it would be the person who's dressed like they've got, you know, a little bit of influence. So I don't know. I would love to make a video about that. I know you can't, because, you know, things like this are not really done in Rwanda, but it would be really, really interesting to, you know, to try that out, like to go to banks and to go to shopping centres, and kind of like me just dressed like I've got a major hangover and I've just woken up on New Year's Day going, you know, and then to go with a friend who's like dressed like perfectly, and just see what the results are, you know, just see what happens. Now, I find this just a really interesting topic, because clearly it shouldn't be happening, but clearly it does happen. I'm going to say straight off the bat that I don't think the idea of reverse racism is the way forward. I don't think the idea of reverse sexism helps anybody either. I don't think the idea of somebody who has been sort of subjugated or discriminated against and hurt or injured, I don't think reversing that and putting that hurt and that injury onto other people is going to make for a better society. I don't think that's going to solve anything really. I think it's just going to create a different divide that then needs to get talked about. But at the same point, I do sympathise, because, you know, I think anybody who's ever suffered an injustice, you know, be it race, sexuality, gender, anything that you can be discriminated against, there's an instinct reaction to want to hurt the person that did it, or the people that you perceive as having done that. So it's a very instinctual, natural kind of reaction to have, but I don't think long term it really helps. And I am very aware that Gandhi is not the name to bring up in Africa, but he occasionally came out with some pretty decent things. Like he said, something along the lines of an eye for an eye makes the whole world blind. And I think if we go down that route, it doesn't really resolve the issue. Now, just before I go into how I think you could maybe start to tackle this, I'm just going to throw in a couple of honourable mentions about why I think this happens. Absolutely 100%. Somebody else hit the nail on the head with this. Rwanda is extremely welcoming to tourists and foreigners and investors as a matter of course. I've talked about this in the nomad visa. They make it so easy for people to relocate here and for people just to come and have a look around and see if there's something they think they could get involved in or start or, assist with. So Rwanda traditionally is an easy place for foreigners and tourists to come. And there's definitely a financial element of that. It's definitely come and spend your money here. So absolutely, as somebody else picked up on, I think there's a lot of don't make it difficult for foreigners. Make sure they have a good time, because then they're going to stay longer, they're going to spend more money, and they're going to recommend it to people. And it works on the whole. People come, they really like it. And yeah, that's a working strategy. And I think it's a working strategy for any country. I don't know many countries that go out of their way to make life really difficult for foreigners. I think generally speaking, if you're throwing a party, you want your guests to have a good time. I think every country has a little element of that. And I think in a lot of countries, foreigners are allowed to get away with a lot more than locals generally are, because there's an understanding that either they don't know the etiquette, or maybe they're just from a culture that's kind of rude anyway, or they're going to be leaving soon anyway. So let's just process them. I think the second part of this is also partly Rwandan service providers trying to make life a little bit easier for themselves. It's generally known that not all cultures, but definitely Western cultures, sometimes European cultures, definitely British cultures and American cultures, people have short patience spans. We're used to a very fast way of life, and we have really crap customer service as well sometimes. Processes don't always work in the countries that we come from, but on the whole, our processes and services have existed for many, many, many years, and they deal with hundreds, sometimes hundreds of thousands of people a week. So our processes are kind of designed to process people and to do it quickly and to do it efficiently. And, obviously it doesn't always work. There's an amazing film. It's an Argentinian film called Wild Tales. If you haven't seen this, I recommend it to everybody, because it's just a story of people reaching breaking point and absolutely just burning the house down. There's one story in there about a construction worker, a demolition worker who keeps getting his car towed away by the council, and he just reaches breaking point. Go and watch that, because I think that film kind of shows you when Westerners and mzungus get to breaking point, they burn down the house. And I think there's definitely an understanding that we are arseholes a lot of the time, and that we get very frustrated very quickly, and it's quite hard to calm us down. And a lot of the services here are still in kind of the design phase. They're still in testing, still working out how to deal with large quantities of people quickly. And so when people see a mzungu walking in with like a face like thunder, it's like, that smell before rain, you can smell the trouble coming. And I think people just go, hell no, just get them out of the door. We're just going to get them out of here, so that we can just get on with our normal job, and it shouldn't be like that. Absolutely shouldn't be like that. And I know I am part of the problem. I've said things on the phone to internet companies here and banks that make me cringe internally, and I know I shouldn't have done it, and I know it makes me an asshole. And the problem is, in an ideal world, we all like to think that we're the best version of ourselves, and that everybody can control their temper, and everybody should just be better. Everybody should just be better. And I totally agree. I feel that way too. But at the end of the day, it's not how human beings work. We get tired and hungry and ratty and argumentative. And that is how human beings work. And we can't always be the best version of ourselves all of the time. And so I think a lot of services here see a mzungu looking like they're getting annoyed, and they're just like, oh God, bomb disposal unit, get them the hell out of here. And it's not right, and we should all be better people. I should be a better person, but I'm not always, and I have had mzungu meltdowns. Anyway, I'm not going to dwell on this. I've talked about it in other places, but I think those are two sort of contributing elements. Is one, the perception of money and not wanting to annoy your investors and your tourists, and two, just thinking, this is more than my job's worth. I cannot deal with this today. Just get them out of here. So I think those things are going on. So what do I think can be done about this? Well, I don't think you can eliminate racial prejudices and discrimination overnight. Clearly, the world has been at this for hundreds of years now, and we still haven't come close. Some countries have been working on it harder than others. America. But, I do think that one way to help to lower the anger levels is for processes and procedures to get a lot more efficient. So I've noticed that not every single situation, but I would say the vast majority of situations in which I've experienced this privilege has been when I've been in a crowded place, a crowded office or a queue for a service. And that's when I get the white privilege. And I think that one way to help to reduce this is for those services to get better for everybody, because nobody should be sitting in a hot office for 1 hour, 2 hour, half a day. That is just not efficient for anybody, and it's not helpful, and it creates situations where one person getting preferential treatment over another is really, really noticeable. Somebody mentioned about the hierarchy. Now, you only need a hierarchy when you're in a situation that is overwhelming and you've got to decide who to serve first, who to work with first. If you eliminate that situation where everybody arrives at once and, you've got this huge backlog, then there is no need to show preferential treatment because everybody's got their allotted time, everybody's being processed in a timely and efficient manner. And then, it's not that the prejudice doesn't still exist, but you don't see it and it doesn't affect you on a day-to-day basis. So, it's not such an in-your-face offence. That would be my suggestion is, at the very beginning of this, the original poster said, countries need to get better at treating their own people better. And if you do that, then if everybody's getting treated better, if it shouldn't be a case where, Mzungus, foreigners and white people get sent to the back of the room and, treat them last because they're not worthy, because that's just reverse racism again. But it should be a case where everybody gets treated well. Everybody gets treated nicely. And in a way, I think Rwanda's definitely made steps towards that by, getting rid of overt in your face corruption, where you don't have to pay to go and get your paperwork processed. Things work the same for everybody most of the time. But it's when those systems get overcrowded and there's too many people that hierarchy comes into play. But yeah, I would be really interested to hear what other people think we could do to help to mitigate this. What practical steps could we take? Because we all know it's happening. We all do. Rwandans know it happens. Mzungus and white people know that it happens. We know that it happens. But as we are now in this situation, how do we get out of it? What do we do to get out of it? I definitely know for my part, I can refuse to accept the summons to move quickly. But if I'm going to do that, I also need to work on my own irritation boundaries and accept the fact that I'm going to be sitting for a long time. without getting overtly angry about it, because then that doesn't help me and it doesn't help the people who are providing the service and doesn't help anyone around me to have like a huffy mzungu in the corner going, oh, for goodness sake. But it's also quite difficult because if a member of staff comes up to you, which they inevitably do, and they say, follow me or come with me, it's really difficult. What you're supposed to do is sit there and say, I refuse to follow you. I'm making a social protest. I can do that. I can. But I don't know. I think it makes it even more awkward for them as well. I don't know. You tell me, what do I do? What is the correct way to handle that? And, if you're a mzungu, what can you do or what do you do to avoid these situations? And if you're Rwandan, what do you think should happen? How do we solve this together? How do we figure this out together so that, we're trying to reduce this overt prejudice, but also not creating other forms of overt prejudice? I'm definitely not one for the reverse racism, sexism, reverse my hurt is being reflected onto you kind of approach. I really don't think that solves anything. But what does solve things? Let me know below. You tell me.